Einen schönen guten Abend. Das funktioniert, ne? Einen schönen guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Herzlich willkommen zum Mediendialog Hamburg, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Ich wechsle die Sprache und wir reden auf Englisch weiter. Please welcome these two gentlemen on this beautiful stage here. Very brief introductions because you know them, of course. John Podesta has founded the Center for American Progress. He was the chairman of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. He advised Barack Obama on climate change and many other political issues. Olaf Scholz, as you well know, is the mayor of the city of Hamburg and one of the, may I say, 3 or 4 leading social democrats leading the party into this September's elections. Before we get to the topic of this conference and to the topic we all are going to discuss today and tomorrow, maybe we won't get there because first we will talk about Donald Trump. Mr. Mayor, you didn't mention his name once in your speech, and if I counted correctly, John, you mentioned Trump 3 times. It seems like you both avoided calling out the name. Have you got used to Donald Trump by now? It's been 103 days.
Yes, I have to, and this is one of the topics we always have to understand, that in the world we live, we have to deal with those who are acting there, and this is now one of the very important politicians in the globe, on our globe, and I'm absolutely sure that it is necessary that we have a way of debate.
My answer is no. And I will not get used to him until he returns to Trump Tower in New York as a private citizen. Look, I have worked with Republicans during my entire career. I think he's a different kind of person. He's operating in a different manner than presidents before him. I'm definitely sore, and I'm a loser, but I don't equate those things. I think that he has inability to stick to the truth, which I think is very dangerous for a leader of the most important country on the earth. I think he has been vexing in terms of even just trying to figure out what he's attempting to do. Of course, in a topic near and dear to my heart on climate change and the environment, he's on a rampage to destroy everything that President Obama and President Bush and President Clinton before him tried. So I think he's, he has a strong base of support still in the country. I would note that Hillary got 3 million more votes than he did, and he got about 46% of the vote. His job approval is about 42% now. I think that he is out of the mainstream of American politics, and I don't mind coming here to a foreign country and saying that I highly disapprove not only of his particular policies, but the way he conducts himself in office. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Mayor, is there anything we can learn from the American elections?
This is a whole book. But to my point of view, one of the things we could learn is that it's absolutely necessary to give some confidence to the people in the globalized economy we live in. And I think there is a big change. The global economy is really successful. It's billions of people who live a better life than they did 10, 20, 30 years before. There's schools, there's hospitals, there's streets, there's electricity, there is water supply, and there's jobs in many countries of the world, especially Asia, and many of the people living there moved up to a sort of middle class, which no one expected 50 or 60 years ago. But at the same time, something happens to the traditionally successful industrialized countries like the Western Europe states, the North American states, Japan, New Zealand, Australia. And in all these countries, we have a decrease in the growth of wealth and the economic success compared to the times before the 80s. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of people who are not that sure that they will be able to have a better future as they have today, and that it will be a good future for their kids. So it is necessary to find a new answer in these countries about a good future, which is not a populist answer. And if we look at the decisions we saw the last year, looking at the United Kingdom, looking at the situation in many of the European countries like the Netherlands, like in Austria, like in France at this time, and looking at the American elections, we should understand something is going on. And it's absolutely necessary for the center of the political debate to find a good answer to that questions, to give the people an idea about a better future, and to choose between candidates which are of this center of political debate.
John, is there anything you can teach us, and do these descriptions sound familiar to you?
Yeah, I think the mayor put his finger right on the main point. People ask me, did we underestimate the rise of right populism in the United States? I don't think we underestimated it. I think the question is, did we sufficiently answer it? And I think that, of course, with not just her experience, but her deep commitment and empathy for working people, we put at the core of our campaign the need to raise wages for people. People hadn't, in the United States, had in the middle, at the bottom, have either gone backwards or seen their wages stagnate for the last, since Bill Clinton left the White House. The last time there was significant wage growth for the middle class and for poor people was when I last worked for him in the White House in 2000. So that was at the core of our campaign, but our campaign never really ended up being about that. And maybe that's our failing. I think we certainly tried to advertise about it. She talked about it, but we were dragged into a conversation that was, I think, to his credit, I think Trump had a very clear understanding of how to control the media dialogue, to change the topic constantly, to say outrageous things, which mean we reacted to the outrageous things he said. So I think the clear answer that the mayor was pointing to about what you need to do to try to build a better future for particularly the middle and the bottom was missing in the campaign dialogue. And again, we bear some of the responsibility for that. It definitely wasn't for lack of trying, but we didn't break through. We were always in this sensationalistic churn with Trump, and we were also burdened by to parse through this, the differential treatment by which we were judged in terms of the investigation of her email versus the FBI's investigation of his campaign's potential collusion with the Russian government. So there were a lot of factors going on, but we never got to the central argument, with the exception of the debates and at the convention, when you had more time to actually break through, talk to people. And I think those were the best moments of our campaign. You're talking about the 3 debates on national television, right? Yes. Yeah.
And I think this is really a difference if you look at the United States and, for instance, a campaign in Germany. The 2 big parties in Germany will spend not more than $40 million for their national campaign, which is not enough to get a seat for the Senate of Connecticut or something like that. And this is really a difference. To become the mayor of the city, it's not necessary to spend more than $1 million. for the party campaign in that area and field. So it is absolutely different to understand that the way of campaigning in the United States and in Germany, for instance, is different looking at that. There is, and this is the second question which is of some importance, a stronger base of media reporting about political questions. It's the newspapers, it's the news magazines, it's the public...
You mean here in Germany?
In Germany, it's the public TV, which it is absolutely possible for citizens in our country to be well informed just looking TV. And this is also the case if they look public TV or if they look some of the private TV stations. They give good information to build your own opinion. And this is, I think, a difference we should understand. And when we look at the strength of the intervention which was possible by using social media in the United States campaign and thinking about the influence, for instance, a Russian impact could have on this campaign in the social media, this is different to Germany because there would be an impact if something like this would happen here, but it would not of this, the outcome would not be the same because of the strengths of the media we have so far in our country.
Just, it's worth noting one statistic. In the last 45 days of the campaign, the top 20 fake news stories, blatantly fake.
Like, for example?
You know,
The
Hillary
Pope.
Clinton's health.
Okay.
The Pope endorsing
Donald Trump.
Endorsed Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton and I were running a child sex ring in the basement of a pizza parlor in Northwest Washington, D.C. Blatantly false stories. The top 20 were shared or liked more than 8.5 million times on Facebook, compared to the top 20 stories from real news sources, like the New York Times, National Public Radio, etc., which were shared or liked 7.5 million times. So there was more production of blatantly false news flowing through those channels than the aggregation of all the resources of the major news outlets in the United States.
I was going to get to that.
That's not simply a Russia problem.
No, that's all right.
That's there's an alternative media, the alt-right media machine in the United States that contributes to that as well.
I was going to get at that question a little later, but since you mentioned the topic, it was one of your final two questions in your speech. Would you hold Facebook accountable for what's being published on Facebook?
I hold Facebook to a standard of operating as an ethical business. So there's a different question about, and in the United States, there's a question of what its obligations are. Is it a publisher when something's posted? What's their obligation to take down information when it's been notified that it's false or it's infringing copyright? Or they seem to manage to do that without a lot of inability or difficulty when it comes to things like child pornography, but they resist when it gets into opinion because they don't want to be censors of free speech, etc. But I do think they have an obligation to operate as an ethical business, and when their business model is, and again, I think Zuckerberg's been out and he's talking about this. There's a very long takeout on this in the New York Times Magazine this weekend. When their business model is to push the sensational and the fake above the real and the true, if you will, then I think they ought to be questioning themselves about whether that's the right business to be in, and they ought to be able to react to it. And I think they probably are likely to get a lot of pressure from their own employees to say, what are we doing here? What kind of results are we producing?
That's already happening. Mr. Scholz?
If you are not at Facebook, which I'm not as a person, but as a system, so someone is doing my posts.
Okay. You mean the system Scholz does have a Facebook page?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you sometimes want to look what is going on at Facebook. Okay. They always ask you questions to find out if you're a real person. So there is something integrated in the Facebook machine to exclude social bots or machines to be part of the procedure. And I think one of the ethical agreements with Facebook should be that they find ways to put out machines producing opinions. It should be natural persons or, for instance, companies doing something and being responsible for what is going on. But it shouldn't be machines, and they should develop techniques to avoid that. The second is they should think about the question whether someone could earn money by doing fake news, which is happening. And this is the second question to think about. And I would say it would be a good way of self-regulation if Facebook would find ways to avoid this development in the system. The third question is how could we install an atmosphere of public debate which we have in the traditional way to communicate as well. For instance, to saying things about Hillary Clinton as were said in the social media during the campaign is a crime in Germany and in the United States, I presume. But if the system is organized in a way that you cannot go against the people doing that, there is a problem to think about. This should be avoided. But in the end, I would not go to the fourth point, which is now the debate we have in Germany, to have something of a more or less benevolent censorship. May it be from Facebook, may it be from public authorities or someone else. This should be not the outcome. To find out what is the truth between us as citizens is something which should develop ourselves in a way of a debate we have. And usually it works. So someone is saying 2 + 2 is 11, but most people don't believe in that. And if we have ways of public debate, this could be the outcome as well. But we should find ways to avoid criminal activities at social media, and it is not the new time that we have to accept that. And this is the path we should follow, to my point of view.
In this piece in the New York Times Magazine, you mentioned, John, I think I read that over the weekend too, I think the main 20 lines or 30 lines maybe were about the basic question, is Facebook really a news organization? Is it a media organization? Or is it just a platform? That's a question of judgment, of course, but if they're a news organization, then of course they're responsible for what they publish. If they are, and if they try to really follow what it means to be responsible, then of course they would be part of the debate. They would be criticized by Republicans. They would be part of the whole fake news discussion from every side. They would be a political party in a way. So they try to avoid it and say, no, wait a minute, we're just a platform, nothing else. And is that the center of the debate?
I'm not into people looking the other way because it might be controversial to look at the problem. I don't know that they have the sole responsibility. I mean, we could be talking about Google, we could talk about other, Snapchat, other platforms as well. I think, though, that they are now, and their system is aggregating news and feeding it in a customized form to individuals based on
what those individuals want.
No, based on what those individuals look at. Now, maybe that's what they want, but it's my point about maybe Facebook knows more about them than they know about themselves. So at least that should be transparent, and that sounds like publishing to me. So I think that's when it comes to copyright obligation, those kinds of questions, it's probably a deeper legal analysis is necessary. But they're not just they're not a common carrier of information. They're operating on the information, aggregating the information, delivering it to people. I don't think you can hide behind a description that all you are is a quote-unquote platform.
We've reached these topics much earlier than I wanted to because of your final questions, the two questions you asked in your speech. Let's get back to Trump for a minute. Is Donald Trump an autocrat, a politician who's constantly lying, who's disrespecting judges, who's disrespecting the media, calling them the enemy of the American people? Does that define an autocrat?
Well, I think that he is not yet an autocrat because the American system hasn't let him be. I think all of those things, including, by the way, his reference to mainstream news media stories that are not to his liking, that are somewhat critical as fake, are strategies that we've seen autocrats deploy in Hungary, in Russia, in Turkey, and his new friend, the president of the Philippines, who's invited to the White House.
Who might not want to be Donald Trump's friend.
I wouldn't want him to be my friend. Or I wouldn't want to be his friend. At any rate, I think those are things that autocrats do. But there's been significant pushback. Judges haven't folded. Judges appointed by Republicans have rejected his overreach, particularly with respect to the Muslim ban. The media hasn't folded; they're more engaged than ever. Probably take take it as a challenge to some extent. So I think if I think he has those tendencies to want to do that, to intimidate. I think they're deeply ingrained in his personality. But so far, I think the American system's held up pretty well.
Mr. Scholz, in the beginning, after my first question, you seemed a little more diplomatic. Maybe you might meet Donald Trump on the international arena someday. Is he an autocrat?
I think we already heard the correct answer to that question. I do trust very much in the American Constitution, the American people, and the American democracy.
A politician surrounding himself with billionaires, that's what Donald Trump is doing. Does that define a plutocrat?
I think that very wealthy people have served the United States very well. I think the real question when looking at the question of whether he's a plutocrat is what are his policies? And in that context, he was even in the healthcare debate, I'm not sure how that was covered here in Germany, but it was the most regressive piece of social legislation really in 100 years in the United States. Massive tax cuts for the wealthy, burdens put on working people, and particularly on the poorest workers by weakening and constraining Medicaid, which provides health care for the poorest people. If you look at the tax plan he put out, the one page that the administration released, it's massive tax relief for the wealthiest Americans. I guess I think that's, I'm not sure I have to go back to Webster's to find out the definition of plutocrat, but that seems like a pretty good one.
It comes close, I guess. Yeah.
And then there's the way he's conducting his own personal affairs and his business entanglements and his family's business entanglements that seem that have raised very serious ethical questions.
Mr. Mayor, anything you want to add?
I think he is. And the irony in this story is that his campaign was about fighting against the plutocrats.
True.
And so it will be very difficult to find an outcome because on the national agenda of the United States, you must find a way to get the people in touch with their politicians. And this is always something which is very difficult and with systems of direct election. If we look at most of the presidents that were elected in the United States, there were, in a way, people that are not from the system of the American politics. It was not always true. But if you look, for instance, at Carter when he was elected, this was because he was someone from the country. It was the same with Clinton. It was not true because he was involved in the American politics and in the national leadership very, very deeply for many, many years. He was one of the parts of your think tank and of the real leaders of the Democratic Party, but no one estimated him like this. It was different with the elder Bush because there was a campaign with two candidates who were from Washington, the Democratic and him.